Let's move on then, please, to the next item, which is the paper on genomics, and just recalling the declaration of interest that I made earlier. I'm going to invite Tim to introduce the paper, and it may be that Bruce will wish to add comments in due course, but Tim.
Yes, so just to pick up on that theme of energy and commitment. So as the paper describes, we've moved now to the point, and I'll update the board shortly, on the 11 designated genomic medicine centres becoming operational. And I'd just first of all like to thank the extraordinary efforts of individuals across England in those 11 centres who have just worked unbelievably hard to get to the point where quite literally the NHS is now leading the world and is at the cutting edge of this very important science. So just the first thing, alongside of course I think thanking the team that has, in NHS England, that has done so much to support the GMCs, and indeed working closely with colleagues at Genomics England to get us to this point. The point we're at now, just to update the paper, is that, as of course everyone will know, 2012 the Prime Minister challenged the NHS to be the first sort of country in the world to sequence 100,000 genomes. Genomics England is working to actually do those sequences. NHS England's responsibility is to support Genomics England in achieving that objective. We've been running a series of complex, very robust tender processes to identify centres in the NHS that will drive that process forward. And the first wave of selection concluded last year with the designation of 11 centres. In fact, the next wave of opportunity for local trust to participate starts in April. Where we are now is that, in fact, as of today, we have 6 of the 11 trusts that have now signed up to the contract that we've arranged for delivery of the 100,000 genomes programme, and indeed one, Greater Manchester, has already started to recruit participants. So we are actually at the very start of this, I think, very important programme. We expect the other genomic medicine centres to sign their contracts and be in a position to start equally recruiting participants over the next 3 to 4 weeks. So we've gone from a point in 2012 to a point today where we are now live with the programme. And I think probably I was going to leave it there, unless people have, of course, questions about the operational delivery of the programme. I think there are 2 outstanding questions which perhaps I might invite Bruce to speak to. One is, I think it's our view that we need to start quite rapidly thinking about what we, NHS England, Genomics England, the department, think is the next step for the programme itself. The programme is meant to conclude in 2017, so we have to offer some views, I think, to the incoming administration about what the shape of the genomics project itself should be during the course of the next Parliament. But equally, there's a more fundamental question to ask about what this implies for the shape of clinical medicine over the next 10 years, 20 years, and again, perhaps a programme we ought to be undertaking today. So perhaps I could just hand over to Bruce.
Well, Tim, thanks very much. Chairman, I'd quite like to put genomics in a slightly wider context. So it seems, in a way that I think I would hope to excite some ambition for the NHS. So it seems to me that there's a confluence of 3 sorts of forces. The first is, I think, quite significant ambition for the NHS, which is articulated in the NHS's own vision, the 5-year forward view, and which Ian has given some kind of express examples of. The second is there is a new science globally which is advancing at pace. The first of those is clearly genomics, and we've discussed that at this board before. But there are 2 other areas where we're seeing a lot of advance. One is in nanotechnology, and the other is in materials science. And then the third force which is coming to play, and which in some ways links all of these, is information technology, in particular mobile digital technology. So if I look at genomics will bring in relatively short order the ability to both predict individuals at risk of certain conditions and populations at risk. It'll give us the opportunity to detect conditions much earlier. So as you know, we may be able to shift from biopsies for some types of cancers to blood tests, which would be an enormous advantage, for example, in detecting recurrence. And it will also give us the ability to give highly targeted treatment for people with very specifically defined conditions. So genomics has a huge future for us. The second area is in material science and bio-nanotechnology. And at the risk of sounding like John's horoscope, there's this new emerging science of theranostics, which essentially means the ability to diagnose something and treat it with a degree of immediacy. And an example of that might be the ability for some implantable, wearable, or even swallowable device to detect, for example, a particular chemical in your blood and dispense a drug to treat you according to whatever it measures. And that kind of technology is not futuristic, it's already here. So I think there's quite a big future in that, which will bring enormous benefits and relief to many patients. And then, of course, we have IT, and in particular mobile IT, which brings immediacy of knowledge, immediacy of information, but also increasingly immediacy of diagnostics to people and to institutions. And will give people huge personal control over their own physiology and their own health. So I think there is a big opportunity for us to try and explore what all of these converging forces mean for the NHS in the short and medium term future. It would be difficult to do it for the much longer term because this is moving so fast. But there are undoubtedly opportunities for us to reinforce the ambition of the 5-year forward view and what that means both for individuals in terms of bringing diagnostics not out of hospitals into primary care and in many cases into people's own homes. So I'd like the board to consider whether we have a responsibility, a duty or an opportunity to work with scientific and other colleagues to try and understand what the confluence of these things mean for our NHS and how we kind of build a synergy that'll promote the ambition that we've already laid out.
Well, thank you, Tim and Bruce. Let me open, please, the floor for discussion. John, who knows something about this area.
I probably have to make a declaration of lifelong obsession as a professional clinical geneticist, but also a declaration of interest in the bio-nanotechnology as I chair a company developing point-of-care diagnostic tools in this field called Quantum DX. So I am obviously fascinated by it and also deeply involved. What I would say is that Tim quite rightly said we are at the cutting edge, because what we're trying to do here is deploy this new technology in the context of an accredited clinical service at scale. Lots of people will claim we've sequenced everyone, but the question is, would you put your life on the data that they're producing? And that, can you rely upon it, and can you incorporate it into healthcare? And that's what the genomic medicine centres are going to have to try and cope with. So I think we need to be clear on that. It isn't just a technology, it's much more than that. The second thing to say is that this is the whole genome application, which we are both so involved in, has to be done at scale if it's to be done at all, if you want to make it reliable and replicable. And so that's why it does need a sort of system shift to make it work. But it isn't just about whole genomes. So we can look at bits of genomes in disease prevention and prediction. So that's what we need. It's more than the 100,000 genomes, sideways as well as in depth. What I would say is that my seat here in this context is to not be a sort of obsessional train spotter, but to actually separate myself from my own enthusiasm and ask for the NHS, how do we embed this in 3 years' time? Because it's very easy for this to be one of those skyrockets that goes up and then fizzles out and comes back down again. So that's a major challenge. And the second major challenge is, to mix my metaphors, not to allow the car to roll back on the hill start. that we're so busy trying to deploy this new technology that the already existing resources, which are among the best in the world, are not properly looked after, and we end up going backwards while we're so busy trying to go forwards. And I think those are the two preoccupations for me. I have no doubt that this is disruptive technology and it is transformational, words that tend to get overused. But it's also dangerous because of the very nature of its transformational disruption, that it could damage what we have and not achieve what it could promise to do. So I think there's a major burden on us to make sure we do both of those things.
Thank you. Let me bring in Kieran and Noel and Moira.
And this isn't meant to be pouring cold water, but it's saying there's one more dimension, which is just we need to think impact in all of this. And so it's not only here's the disruptive stuff and let's make sure we use the assets that exist at the clever end, but also we need to take the portfolio view and say, well, actually, maybe what we really need is 20 physiotherapists, not, this latest piece of multi-million-pound kit as well. So somewhere in all of this, as Bruce, you think through the whole spectrum, can we not forget some of the really basic stuff as well, and say, actually, maybe what we really need is one of Ian's clever care models, which involve physios, and the other stuff can arrive in 3 years' time, or vice versa. But have the whole thing in our heads, not just the new bits.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Totally.
Right, that's a rare outbreak of consensus now. Noel and Moira.
I wanted to respond, Malcolm, to Bruce's question around whether the NHS should do a piece of work specifically to look at the confluence of the three forces you mentioned. You'll know that the Minister for Life Sciences has launched, as part of a government initiative, a review of innovative medicines and related technologies, which John and myself sit on the advisory group for that committee. And having seen what they plan to do, which is really to accelerate practical innovations that will make a difference to many areas of specialised commissioning in particular, I feel increasingly that we, the NHS, need a point of view to inform what that committee is doing. And I don't know if John agrees, but having attended the first kick-off meeting only last week, I think this is a bit of a gap, as you defined it, where the expression of a point of view from our side would massively inform the direction in which that important review actually is going to go. So I'd support what you suggest.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Moira.
Can I just ask where the responsibility lies for getting the balance right between protection of intellectual property and commercial opportunities, as it were? Is that with NHS England or somewhere else in the complicated system?
Please.
So the governance structure is complex, but it's working and it's relatively straightforward, which is that NHS England and Genomics England both have their own boards. The programme itself is accountable through the Department of Health. So the SRO for this programme, the 100,000 programme, is in the Department of Health and reports that way up through the normal mechanism. So in terms of judging some of these very important issues, one of which you've described, there are other ethical issues. There are big issues around consent, which we need to get right. There are, essentially, it's a collaborative endeavour which finally reaches a point through the Department of Health. So proposals have been made around things like trying to manage the relationship between the potential economic opportunity that is going to be developed, quote, if it works, against the human right that there should be no cost or charge for people to obtain clinical benefit from the output. So these are, I think there is a process for providing proper governance accountability around resolving those issues. And if I may, just to pick up on some of the points, I think if I could also in a way agree with the proposal that we do some work on this, is because I think we have to answer Kieran's question, which is that that this is so not brand new, but it's so sort of untested in the real world environment of a national health service at scale. We don't know how long it'll take to produce the kind of clinical value from the linkage of phenotypic and routine and genomic data, etc., and it may take longer than we expect. It may cost us more than we expect. But what we need to do is to start doing some, I think, rather detailed economic modelling to support the case for prioritising this against, say, physiotherapists in a vanguard as a concept, and I think that's something that will inform George Freeman's review in a very important practical way, because there's always a risk that the horizon scanning excitement does potentially distract attention from the real world needs of the NHS in terms of
specialised commissioning decisions which need a forward view of what's coming over the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Victor.
It's just a minor point, really, but I think, just to add to that, I think I'm increasingly interested in the sociology of all this.
Yeah.
It's not just the technology, the sort of business case. It's also something about who are we seeking to affect? How do we make those choices? We had the conversation of which diseases, which bits of the community, and how transparent is that? So it'd be really, I don't know who's going to do this, but it seems to me that we need a safe view of the sociological impact alongside the point that Kieran very, very usefully made. Otherwise, it kind of feels a bit haphazard.
Could I come back on that, Victor? I mean, that's a very big question, but one thing just as a reassurance is that I think 10 of the 11 genomic medicine centres have at their core, as the actual leadership, the regional genetics centre, or member of the regional genetics centre. The only one that isn't, I know, is a surgeon, but is a close friend and worked in genetics for a long time. The point is that as an organisation, the NHS has been a world leader in medical and clinical genetics. Genomics is a sort of expansion of that, out of the inherited traits, because we invented the word genetics 100 years ago, into genomics, which is about looking at your whole printout. And actually that word was invented by my old boss for a name for a new journal, 1975. So we're basically shifting from just looking at hereditary traits into looking at people's total printout. It is a major step, but we've already taken the first step by embedding genetics into our healthcare system and having a very well-established regional genetics network which works closely together. Yeah. And I think that's a great safety net for making sure we deploy this, because many of the ideas and concepts have been thought through before we had the technology. Whereas in many other settings, there is no genetic service, therefore they're just dropping it in from a great height, and it will cause major problems. So I think that if we don't ignore the expertise and knowledge of the regional genetics centres in its deployment, we'll be well placed, because I think down the line you can see that what we'll be expecting is that multidisciplinary teams, including those geneticists, will think on the ground how best to deploy this technology. And that I think will inevitably take account of many of the sociological and economic factors that you are preoccupied by, because I think they are deciding how you spend this money, as Kieran is really alluding to, is critically important. You can easily do a lot of fancy work but not actually save many lives.
Right, I think that's been a very valuable discussion. I think we shouldn't go away from this assuming that this is straightforward and easy. There are many complexities. The first is the complexity of the relationship between us and Genomics England Limited. And that's involved a lot of hard work and partnership to make that work, because the long-term objectives are identical. The short-term interactions have been quite difficult from time to time. I think secondly, we started off with an assumption that the really difficult stuff was the sequencing. Well, it's not. Actually, I mean, the cost of sequencing has plummeted, the efficiency, the high throughput, and the accuracy has continued to rise. It's Moore's law with a factor of multiples in terms of the transformation of technology. And by the way, the sequencing will be done in this country. I think it's a very nice coincidence that following the discovery of DNA in Cambridge, following the sequencing of the first human genome in Cambridge plus the US, now the sequencing for this will be done in Cambridge and a new facility funded by the Wellcome. I think, though, that the major complexity is two complexities. One is getting the samples, particularly in cancer, to a level of accuracy and with sufficient DNA in them to make them successful for the sequencing. But the second and much more complex is actually the interpretation. And we're not there. I mean, there's a long way to go yet in terms of understanding the printouts and their correlation with particular types of disease. We're probably more successful in the early stages with rare diseases and with cancer, which is why those two have been chosen as the two leading operations. But two aspects to this. First of all, Genomics England have set up GSIP, the Genomics Clinical Interpretation Partnership, which is involving clinicians from across the country coming together in groups and focusing on particular areas of disease. Secondly, trying to create a structure in which we can bring in expertise from around the world to help us solve some of the big problems with the data, and trying to make that flexible, using Illumina probably to some extent who are our sequencers, but using other organizations just to help us to understand what the data mean. And that's the foundation stone for the vision that Bruce was outlining as to how that then starts to help us in prediction and in therapeutics. So it's a long way to go, and I think even after the first 100,000 have been sequenced, we will continue to learn from those results for years and years to follow. But what we would like to bring brought back to the board, I think, as well, what is the implication for the NHS? We never wanted this to be a research project. It's not a research project, it's a clinical transformation project, and I think we would therefore very much want to pick up on your offer, Bruce and Tim, to come back to the board with a paper that explores the future implications.
Chairman, may I just be clear that I think it's important that this covers more than just genomics, so that genomics is, if you like, the fulcrum for the discussion, but the other forces are
yes,
really
indeed.
very important. Otherwise we do end up, if we don't even know the magnitude of the problem, and so I think Victor's comments about we could end up in some kind of haphazard place is a risk if we don't at least explore the terrain.
And molecular pathology.
Indeed.
Right, thank you very much, Bruce and Tim. It gives me great pleasure.